Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the man you've called father your entire life isn't actually your father. For Prince Harry, that nightmare became a reality in the most shocking way imaginable. A private DNA test, meant to clear up a small family curiosity, revealed a truth that sent shockwaves through the palace and the world. King Charles is not his biological father. Instead, the results pointed to a figure long whispered about in royal circles, someone who had shared a secret connection with Princess Diana decades ago, James Hewitt. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The revelation didn't just shake Harry personally, it threatens to upend the entire monarchy. Royal succession, public perception, and decades of carefully curated family image suddenly hang by a thread. Imagine being groomed your whole life to carry a legacy, only to discover that legacy is built on a lie. Harry isn't just grappling with betrayal. He's confronting a reality that challenges everything about his identity, his history, and his place in the world. This story matters now more than ever. In an era of endless media scrutiny and social media speculation, secrets don't stay buried. Leaks, whispers, and conjecture have already begun circulating, and every headline further escalates the tension. The public is captivated, the palace is scrambling, and Harry is forced to make decisions that will define the rest of his life. His emotional journey, from shock to heartbreak to decisive action, is something the world can't look away from. But the story isn't just about DNA results or palace drama. It's about family, identity, and the painful question of what it means to belong. How does a prince reconcile his royal upbringing with a biological truth that changes everything? And how does he move forward, knowing that the man he revered as his father, the man who represented the monarchy itself, isn't his father at all? What makes this tale even more explosive is the timing. Harry isn't alone. Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet are all part of this emotional storm. And the choices Harry makes next could shock the world in ways no one expected. Secrets, betrayals, and hidden truths are about to collide, and the consequences will be impossible to ignore. And just when it seems like the world has grasped the enormity of this revelation, Harry takes a step that no one saw coming. A step that severs ties, challenges centuries of tradition, and sends a message that some truths are too important to ignore. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started with a whisper, a quiet suspicion that Harry had tried to push aside for years. But whispers have a way of growing louder, especially when they come from the most unexpected places. A casual remark from a trusted friend, a passing comment about similarities in appearance or mannerisms, sparked a chain reaction that would lead to one of the most explosive revelations in modern royal history. Could it really be true? Could everything Harry believed about his family, his identity, even his role in the monarchy, be built on a lie? The story begins in private, far from the prying eyes of the press. Harry, known for his resilience and independent streak, had always trusted his instincts. Something didn't feel right. The timeline, the stories, the rumors he had heard as a child, they all pointed to questions that had never been asked aloud. And so, quietly, he made a choice that would change everything. He initiated a DNA test, not for the public, not for headlines, but for himself. The tension of that moment, the fear of what the results could reveal, was almost unbearable. What if the truth destroyed the family he loved? What if it shattered the identity he had carried since birth? As the results came in, the room fell silent. Numbers, percentages, and scientific certainty replaced uncertainty, and the truth hit like a thunderbolt. King Charles, the man who had raised him, guided him, and represented the monarchy he would inherit, was not his biological father. Harry's heart sank, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and betrayal coursing through him. Every memory, every childhood story, every royal ceremony suddenly carried a new, unsettling weight. The man he thought was his father, a figure entwined with tradition, legacy, and national expectation, was not his father at all. The initial shock was followed by a rush of questions. Who was my real father? Why wasn't this revealed earlier? Why did everyone keep this a secret? And then there was the fear of the ripple effect. The palace, the press, the public. How would they react? How would this change the story of the monarchy? And how would it change him? Harry realized that this discovery was more than personal, it was historic. The implications reached far beyond his own life, threatening to rewrite the narrative of the royal family itself. And yet, amid the fear and confusion, there was a glimmer of something else, clarity. For the first time, Harry knew the truth. But the truth was just the beginning. It came with a weight that he hadn't anticipated, a force that would push him toward decisions no royal had ever dared make. The DNA results weren't just a revelation. They were a catalyst for a series of events that would send shockwaves across the world. And just when he thought he could process it all, another piece of the puzzle emerged. A name that had haunted royal rumors for decades. A man connected to Diana, to the whispers, to the secret that no one wanted revealed. The DNA test hadn't just shattered old beliefs. It pointed directly to James Hewitt. And what Harry did next would shake the palace like never before. But what happened when he confronted the first hint of this truth? The answer would shock even those closest to him, and set the stage for the ultimate betrayal. The DNA results arrived like a storm, sudden and unavoidable. Harry had braced himself for questions, maybe a minor surprise, but nothing could prepare him, or the palace, for the reality that stared back from those scientific sheets. The numbers were indisputable. The match that should have been there wasn't. King Charles was not his biological father. Every certainty Harry had held about his life, the bloodline, the legacy, the expectation of following in royal footsteps, was suddenly thrown into chaos. The palace's reaction was almost as intense as Harry's. Behind the ornate doors of Buckingham, a series of closed-door meetings erupted in whispered panic. Advisors, aides, and lawyers were summoned. Protocols were reviewed. Crisis management teams were deployed. The monarchy, an institution built on stability and continuity, suddenly faced a truth that threatened its very foundation. Imagine centuries of tradition, carefully maintained for the public eye, colliding with a single, undeniable fact. How do you contain that? How do you spin it? How do you even begin to explain it to the world? But Harry wasn't thinking about politics or PR. He was thinking about betrayal, personal, intimate, and painful. The man who had raised him, guided him, and stood beside him through every public triumph and personal struggle wasn't his father. The emotional impact was staggering. Every childhood memory of fatherly advice, every private conversation, every moment of support was now tinged with an unsettling question. Was it genuine, or was it just part of the story he had been told? Amid the shock, the rumors that had floated through tabloids for decades began to make sense. James Hewitt, the former cavalry officer rumored to have been close to Princess Diana, suddenly became more than gossip. The timelines aligned. The suspicions whispered behind closed doors were validated. And yet, the palace tried to contain the fallout, insisting on discretion, careful phrasing, and strategic silence. But in today's world, secrets are fragile. Once a fact this explosive exists, it finds a way out. Through leaks, through speculation, through the inevitable curiosity of the public. Harry's mind raced. The DNA results weren't just numbers. They were a trigger, a revelation that demanded action. How could he continue life under a roof filled with faces that suddenly felt unfamiliar? How could he stand in ceremonies meant to honor a legacy he wasn't truly part of? And perhaps the most painful question of all, if King Charles wasn't his father, what did that make him? An outsider? A stranger? Or something in between? As the weight of the discovery settled, Harry knew one thing. This was only the beginning. The DNA results had opened a door, and beyond it lay truths, confrontations, and consequences he had never imagined. Secrets would be unearthed. Loyalties would be tested. And one step, one bold, irrevocable step, would change everything about his relationship with the royal family. And just when he began to grapple with the enormity of it all, a quiet message arrived. One that would confirm the whispers, connect the dots, and force Harry to confront a shocking reality he had only dared to imagine. The name on that message would shake him to his core. But what came next would challenge everything he had ever believed about family, love, and loyalty. And it was a revelation no one in the palace could ignore. For decades, the name James Hewitt had lingered on the edges of royal gossip. An officer with a charming smile, a presence that somehow captured the attention of Princess Diana, and a story that tabloids couldn't resist spinning. But until now, It had been just that: whispers, rumors, and speculation. No proof, no confirmation, just tantalizing hints that sparked curiosity and scandal in equal measure. For Harry, however, the DNA results transformed those whispers into undeniable reality. James Hewitt wasn't just a figure in old gossip columns. He was his biological father. The revelation hit Harry like a tidal wave. Every public appearance of Diana, every story about her private struggles, every mention of her close companions suddenly took on a new significance. The timeline, carefully hidden or overlooked for decades, now aligned perfectly. The years when Diana and Hewitt were known to be close coincided with Harry's conception. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces that had long been ignored were no longer just speculation. They were proof. And proof has a way of rewriting everything you thought you knew about your own life. James Hewitt himself had largely stayed out of the limelight, appearing occasionally in interviews or books, but never confirming the rumors that surrounded him. Now, decades later, Harry had a biological connection he couldn't ignore, and Hewitt represented not just the truth, but a path to understanding a part of himself he had been denied. Questions swirled. What does it mean to have your father be someone who was a stranger until this moment? How do you reconcile your royal upbringing with a lineage that suddenly diverges so dramatically? And most importantly, how would the public react once this connection became known? The irony of the situation was almost unbearable. Harry had grown up under the expectations of monarchy, learning protocol, duty, and tradition, all while his real father lived a life completely separate from the world he was preparing to inherit. How does someone reconcile privilege with the shock of discovering that their foundation, family, identity, legacy, is not what it seemed? Harry found himself navigating a storm of emotions: betrayal, curiosity, grief, and a strange sense of relief. At least now he knew the truth. At least now, he could face the reality head-on, rather than live under a shadow of uncertainty. But connecting with James Hewitt was not just about biology. It was about closure, about understanding the choices and circumstances that shaped his mother, his upbringing, and ultimately, his own life. There was a tension in every thought. Hewitt represented answers, but also new questions, and perhaps even conflict with the family Harry had always known. How would Charles react? How would Diana's legacy be reframed in the public eye? And what did this mean for Harry's own children, Archie and Lilibet, as they looked to their father for guidance, identity, and a sense of belonging? As Harry grappled with these questions, one undeniable truth remained: life would never be the same. The man who had dominated royal headlines for decades, James Hewitt, was now at the center of a story that would define Harry's future, reshape the narrative of the monarchy, and shock the world. And just as Harry began to consider what to do next, a private meeting was arranged, a meeting that would force him to confront not just the truth about his father, but the implications of a secret that had been buried for decades. But what happened in that meeting would shock him, and the world, in ways no one could have predicted. Imagine your entire world collapsing in an instant. For Prince Harry, the DNA results weren't just a revelation. They were a seismic rupture, shaking the very foundations of his identity, his past, and his future. The man he had called father for 37 years, the figure who embodied the monarchy and his sense of legacy, was not his biological parent. And the man who was, well, James Hewitt, someone who had always existed on the fringes of rumors, suddenly became the center of his reality. The shock was overwhelming, and the emotional fallout would be unlike anything the royal family had ever seen. The first moments were filled with disbelief. Harry stared at the results, numbers and percentages confirming what his heart struggled to accept. His mind raced through memories, childhood moments, lessons, celebrations, moments of comfort from Charles, and wondered if any of it was genuine. Was it all a performance, a carefully orchestrated facade? Even the loving gestures now carried a shadow of doubt. And yet, amid the betrayal, there was an undeniable clarity. He finally knew the truth about his origins. But clarity came at a cost. The emotional toll was immense. Harry experienced grief for the father he thought he had, anger at the secrecy and deception, and guilt for even questioning the man who had raised him. How could he reconcile his love for Charles with the knowledge that their bond was biological fiction? Every conversation, every royal duty, every moment shared suddenly felt like a double-edged sword. And Harry wasn't just thinking about himself. He had to consider the impact on Meghan, Archie, and Lilibet. How would they navigate a world where their father's identity, a cornerstone of their lives, was now under intense scrutiny? Isolation followed quickly. Even those closest to him couldn't fully understand the storm raging inside. Meghan, supportive and protective, tried to anchor him, but Harry felt a loneliness unlike any before. Public scrutiny would follow, of course, but the private agony, the betrayal, the loss, the reshaping of his personal history, was something he had to endure alone. He questioned everything he had ever been taught about family, loyalty, and belonging. And as the truth settled in, Harry realized that he had to make a decision, one that would have far-reaching consequences. The decision to confront the royal family, to speak out, to sever ties, wasn't just strategic, it was deeply personal. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about reclaiming his identity, asserting the truth, and protecting his own children from a legacy built on deception. Every instinct told him this path would be painful, but necessary. And as he began to plan his next moves, he felt the weight of history pressing down. Centuries of tradition, expectations, and public image all colliding with the reality of his DNA results. But just as he gathered the courage to act, another shock awaited. A revelation, hidden in plain sight, that would intensify his emotional turmoil and force him into a confrontation with the very heart of the monarchy. The moment that followed would test his resilience, his resolve, and his understanding of family in ways no one could have anticipated. And what came next would force Harry to make a choice that could not be undone, and it would shock the world to its core.